from the Loyola University of Chicago. She is an associate professor of classical studies and an associate dean for academic affairs in the College of Arts and Sciences. She is also an associate faculty member in the Women's Studies and Gender program. She has a bachelor's degree from Princeton University, an MA, MPhil, and PhD from Columbia University. Her research specialties lie in the areas of late antique history and literature, Roman history and literature, documentary information from papyri, Roman coinage, the authors Claudian, Macrobius, and Synesius, and women and gender in the classical world. Some publications of note, one titled Performance, an approach to strengthening interdisciplinarity in women's and gender studies. And then there's also Gender, Democracy, and the Justice of Athena's Vote to Acquit Orestes. Two books are well known, Claudian's Eutropium, or How, When, and Why to Slander a Eunuch, and Barbarians and Politics at the Court of Arcadius with Alan Cameron. This afternoon, Professor Long will talk to us on Praise Due, Julian's Oration, honoring Eusebia. Please join me in welcoming our guest.
What should be thought about people who owe great debts and beyond great? I don't say gold or silver, but absolutely anything someone happens to experience in a good way from a neighbor. And then they don't try or intend to pay it back comparably, but stay neglectful and disdainful about doing what they can in discharging the debt. Isn't it clear they must be counted as base knaves? Let me seize at once on the admonition of my text and address your great hospitality with at least the very small return of my thanks. You are being most kind. It has been a delight to meet and to talk with you, sharing earnestly to make this visit worth something for you in return. The question is how far what I can will go toward discharging the debt you so generously laid me with. So, let us look for a moment at what I have just done. I have set down the marker of an intention to talk about the topic I promised, Julian's Oration honoring Eusebia, by quoting his opening words. I have digressed onto our present relationship, incorporating you as my benefactors and the impresarios of this address into the experience itself. Modesty Topos endeavors to manage your expectations, but it is also part of that mutuality of relationship within which we are working, and which the topic of thanks in particular emphasizes as one of gift and exchange in return. So, Julian, with his oration regarding these cultural materials, is deploying his topics in order to create a comparable effect. The typical occasion of late Roman panegyric was very ceremonial and apparently quite ubiquitous. Most often, speakers were endeavoring to create a relationship by their praise in an address to a visiting governor or somebody else who could do something very important for their community. They hoped toward the conclusion of the speech to make a petition for some particularly important favor, remittance of taxes, or creation of a new decree giving privileges to their community. But they were at the same time part of formal ceremonies that articulated the movement of personnel about the late Roman world the workings of imperial administration, and it called people together for extended periods of time in which the speaker was what was going on. And so the entertainment function itself was not inconsiderable. There evolved, just out of the basic understanding of what was going on in these occasions, a template of structures in which praise could be articulated, looking from the background of the individual being addressed down into descent, birth, childhood, and promise of future greatness, to an account of significant deeds in adulthood that would somehow act as the topic of praise and the assurance of whatever favors the speaker was going to be asking for. And so the audiences who had also experienced this preparation for this type of address as part of their education could be extremely expert critics of how the speaker was addressing the typical challenges of these occasions, just because they happened so much. And so we get a kind of dialogue of literary meaning within these addresses. And what Julian is doing in this speech for Eusebia, in sort of talking through how he will approach some of the standard structures of his literary form, is engaging with that critical acumen, and it gets us into elements of reader response criticism, as he's calling the shots, this is how I want you to be responding, and performance theory, what he does on a particular occasion to activate this broader cultural expertise. His speech of thanks to Eusebia was composed within a few years of when he was elevated to the rank of Caesar, junior emperor, and sent off to Gaul. This elevation happening in 355. Unique accidents distinguish the speech itself as a work of this formalized praise. No other preserved late Roman oration praises a living empress. Julian cannot ever have delivered it before her. The text speaks of her remotely in the third person, even if Julian sent the speech from his court to Constantius's for some intermediary to read out. Whatever light the speech casts on his relationship with Eusebia falls obliquely. Julian later revolted against Constantius in 360-361, and that event erased credence for the two encomia that he wrote for Constantius. And so study is focused on political questions in assessing the speech for Eusebia. Did Julian sincerely esteem her? Did praise for her veil some kind of subversion? Neither possibility is assured, neither rules out the other. The speech itself takes its unusual circumstances under advisement, and standard rhetorical precepts allowed for the basilikos logos, the address to an emperor, to have its divisions adapted, showing off different honorands, each to the best advantage. Julian directed his thanks to a royal woman within the license of his form. But the commentary with which he punctuated his praise integrates this speech more deeply. Julian spoke through encomium as a very particular Roman literary form to a late Roman valuation of learning, and his emphases demand attention. Julian conspicuously cited rhetorical commitments in all his panegyrics. His first encomium for Constantius names rhetors and their craft, epidictic speeches, the genre of commendations, and its law, setting topics of the speech. The terms of art sharpened a double contrast for Julian's own address. He asserted that just as poets can support fictions by claiming divine inspiration, practiced public speakers readily inflate and diminish topics. They might eulogize the undeserving. He himself must unassumingly attempt a simple narrative so that he could acknowledge excellence in a manner befitting philosophy, the cloak that he chose to make claim to. So this contrast promises truth in the substance of his praise, while ostensibly disavowing polished language. In the second encomium to Constantius, which is probably a couple of years later than either the first oration or the speech for Eusebia, Julian contrasted his relationship with Constantius to Achilles with Agamemnon. He again used the basic rhetorical outline, but now he embroidered intensely with Homeric comparisons. It's really kind of manic as they start proliferating through the thing. The speech of thanks to Eusebia unites these different tropes. Julian in this speech still holds himself to philosophical priorities, but he embraces oratorical and literary expression more broadly. He cited now Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle as precedents, also Xenophon's historical writing. He also called on Homer's descriptions of Arete, and especially Penelope, as models legitimating praise of a woman. But although the reader's licensed superficial captatio benevolentiae and adornment, Julian worked more deeply. Ceremony structured late antique public life. Its forms and the signs it broadcast composed a language. Ancient audiences interrogated formalities in order to form judgments about the persons directing their communities. Amid the narrative tableau he made of Julian's first elevation, for example, Annius Marcellinus focused on the army's ascent and described the soldiers' gaze at their new Caesar as divinatory scrutiny. Julian's self-conscious gesturing in the speech about Eusebia about rhetorical, poetic, and philosophical proprieties focused attention on his position as speaker before the public eye. The character he assumed engaged his audience. They were invited to judge his performance. And this contest, Julian against the standards, helped to integrate his speech. Julian depicted himself in his first encomium for Constantius as a philosophically educated outsider to the norms of court, who, nevertheless, or perhaps therefore, could see that world clearly. He redeployed this characterization when he described his elevation in the speech of thanks to Eusebia, also in his rebellious letter to the council and people of Athens. There, of course, when he is in revolt against Constantius, he is much more open about the oppressive nature of the situation he was cast in, and obviously hostile to Constantius's agency himself. Even there, he does describe Eusebia as kindly, and so there is some basis for thinking that he did harbor a sincere regard for her, but that's almost not an issue in the speech as a rhetorical work. In the second encomium for Constantius, Julian played a divinely gifted subordinate. The speech of thanks to Eusebia sets up an ethical goal as well as a rhetorical one. What should be thought about people who owe great debts? Both in his lengthy proem and in the encomium's body, he declared concern not to seem to flatter meretriciously, not to be diminished by the appearance of dependency, and positively to make a fitting return through thanks for the benefits he received. This ethical project gave Julian context to harmonize philosophical insight and commendation and to encompass broader cultural relevance. Having justified his panegyric, finally by invoking the disguised Athena's description of Arete, Julian announced her speech would pattern his. It is fitting, I think, to make my arrangement exactly following the steps I've already said. He walks through quoted lines from that speech of Athena to Odysseus. Follow my speech exactly following the steps I've already said, the same as hers, and recall Eusebia's native country, her ancestors, how she married and whom, and all the rest in the same fashion. Arete was the obvious Homeric analog for the benefactions Julian credited to Eusebia. Constantius's unexplained harshness and suspicion of Julian imperiled him as much as Poseidon's wrath imperiled Odysseus. But when Odysseus was most abject, a ruler's honored wife took a friendly attitude toward him and enabled him to be restored in his own land and even elevated. Athena does not, however, say anything about Arete's homeland. Julian inserted Eusebia's Macedonia, blandly adding a section that belongs to the rhetorical scheme to the poetic original he had just quoted extensively. This literary synthesis is very much part of the modality he adopts in the speech, or in literary terms, having his cake and eating it too. The combination illustrates how very salient the rhetorical standards were to the act of praise that he is engaged in. And so he proceeds with this literary standard under a Homeric banner. So dealing with the native land, he alleges that a variant story says that the music came from Pieria, not Heligon, to Olympus. Scribbled something in the margin that I now cannot read. But by bringing in this brief mention of divinity, he plants a marker for an association with Eusebia that he is going to make use of later. He just sort of throws it out there without doing anything more with it at the moment. Instead, self-referentially, he darts away from it, declining to dwell on the mythological in Eusebia's roots. Instead, more consciously, he highlights Philip and Alexander from their Heraclid ancestry to their conquest that forerun the Macedonian Hellenistic kingdoms. These additions also have very little to do with Eusebia. Similarly, Julian's account of Eusebia's father consists of unpersonalized, totally conventional praise of a first consulate in the family. What the heritage does is claim space in the encomium to associate Eusebia with the Muses, with a Hellenic legacy of overmastering valor, and with the quintessential Roman political honor. And these thematic things Julian packs under that Homeric flag, cultural ballast of separate and contemporary value. The next heading Julian announced, Eusebia's marriage, is split in the speech of thanks by fervent digression. Constantius chose Eusebia, Julian explained, after repressing a violent usurper. He wished to marry and to beget legitimate heirs to his authority and power. He takes Eusebia as a fitting partner for him in this authority. Julian assigned his figure of Constantius a list of virtues as a point of departure. He is manly, he is self-disciplined, he is wise, he is just, he is beneficent, he is mild, he is great of soul. His choice correspondingly takes in all of Eusebia's qualities. Her beauty outshone other maidens like moonlight dimming stars. This epithalamic image derived from Sappho. Eusebia's widowed mother's outstanding reputation betokened Eusebia's own modest disposition. Constantius's deliberation thus serves the function of epitedumata in the Basilicos Logos, for tokening the character to be exercised in the focal process, but it has led Julian entirely out of any encroachment on the personal space of Eusebia's own life as an unmarried woman. He does it all through the judgment of her husband. Julian stated Constantius wed Eusebia splendidly, feasting nations and cities and peoples. But rather than going into the specifics of the ceremony itself, he pounced on anyone who wishes to hear how the bride was called from Macedonia with her mother, and the sumptuous particulars. There's just a few little hints, but let him know. If he wants to hear more, he sets his heart on extremely childish things to hear. Instead, Julian posited in detail a hypothetical contest of a Terpander or an Orion. Completely unrelated figures, but nevertheless, this is where he's going. We're not going to hear about the actual wedding. Hypothetical contest. One of the epitomes of musical art, against a richly dressed but unprincipled lyre player. Ignorant masses would thrill, but a connoisseur would not take lightly tunes being mixed up for the sake of pleasure, and would hate it if this competitor spoiled the modes of music, or used the scales not in the necessary way, or not according to the laws of true divine music. This praeteritio does none of the things that you expect a praeteritio to do. It does not save time. It does not cannily push listeners' imagination to supply visions more dazzling than the speaker renders. Julian is reproving aesthetic pleasure outside rules of his performance genre, precisely by not doing something that his performance genre normally does. The musician's ancestry in Platonic analogy elevates this strictness. Julian sternly pulls the speech of thanks back from ekphrasis, a common amplification in encomium and epithalamium, to the concentration on virtue that his proem promised. Indirectly, he acknowledges that panegyric too aims at pleasure. But the programmatic rebuke vividly derails any hedonically decorative tendency. The wedding pomp elided signifies Constantius's moral judgment and regal commitment. But for, instead of purely gorgeous narrative for the sake of being gorgeous, Julian is signaling the probity of his own praise. Eusebia demonstrated, according to Julian, the virtues his speech praises her for entirely within the confines of her marriage. This topic, in the allegedly Homeric plan Julian announced for his speech, thus overlaps with the standard rhetorical plan that the ethical musical digression articulates. An emotional escalation accentuates this partition. Although Athena's praise for Arete could have justified the same assertions about Eusebia, Julian now transferred his Homeric analogy to Penelope. He initially introduced Penelope glancingly. With Arete, she is a validating example of Homeric praise for virtuous women. Her standard of continence measures Eusebia's mother. But when Julian averred it is a sign of Eusebia's sagacity and all the rest of her excellence that she has inspired her husband with the attitude toward her that is right for a beautiful and noble wife, he proved it by Penelope. Odysseus spurns rich attractions of goddesses and princesses, so he might return to her. He shares with her completely his experiences and plans. His deceased mother in the afterlife recognizes he would. Knowing someone else's heart seems to be a particularly female virtue, according to this speech. The educational heritage Julian shared with his listeners of closely reading Homer and reprocessing Homeric dilemmas in monologues allowed him to conjure warm immediacy from them, with a few quotations and an imagined challenge to Odysseus. He leveraged emotions as effectively as his audience appreciated Odysseus's unity with his wife. At least in Julian's judgment, Homer made readers feel. Julian appropriated this discourse and its effects. Repurposing now an Iliadic image, Julian affirmed Eusebia drew on 2 jars of affection with Constantius, one from the love between them, and one from her own goodness, becoming partner of his intentions, able to realize his innate mildness and turn his justice to pardon. He likened her interventions also to the classical Athenian rule that a tie vote of the democratic jury added the vote of Athena to the defendant, so that he would be acquitted without making his accuser seem to have brought a malicious charge. Julian characterized the period when the Athenians used their ancestral customs and lived in obedience to their native laws, thus a period of authentic virtue. He contrasted Constantius's compliance against Zeus's unwilling concession to Hera that she might obliterate Troy. Julian thus firmly identified Eusebia in her marriage as embodying Constantius's better nature, wholly harmonious with him in cosmically civic scope. Julian first teased apophatically Eusebia's actions living out this magnificent description. Eusebia never called for any ill of any kind, even as a punishment deserved, on any kingdom or city or household. No one could say she was responsible for any misfortune of any man or woman. He could enumerate reprieves, and no one at all will say I say these things falsely, even if I do not list the men by name. He will not name them, however, lest he seem to catalogue others' misfortunes rather than to praise her good acts. Julian's exuberant skirts parodying tropes of credibility. Marginally more definitely, in borrowing a phrase for prominence half-quoted from Pindar by name, he applauded Eusebia's headhunting for Constantius among her family, extended family, and inheritors of relationships with her family. Still, he did not name individuals. At last, since I see my reckoning needs proofs, as it were in a law court, I shall hand myself over to you for laudatory testimony. Julian professed reliability as a witness, recurring to the themes of his poem, on the grounds that he could not be thought to flatter, since the emperor and empress had already given him everything a flatterer might scheme to gain. If he could not outdo their kindness with his recompense, like Darius, he should at least demonstrate his grateful intentions. Julian tallied Eusebia's benefactions to him in 2 roughly parallel narrations. First, he explained Constantius had shown him kindness and protected him virtually all his life, even restoring familial property to him when it had been taken away by someone in power. Julian had always shown myself well-disposed and trustworthy toward him, but recently, he did not know why, he had found Constantius harsher in his attitude. Eusebia, hearing of it, reacted to word of an empty suspicion. She investigated. She rejected lying, unjust slander, and secured for Julian an interview with Constantius. She shared in the knowledge he cleared himself entirely. When he wished to go home again, she got Constantius's permission and provided for him to travel safely. When this journey could not be completed, she won Constantius's permission for him to go to Greece. She had found out that I delight in literature and understood this place is fitted for education. Julian prayed gratefully for blessings on Eusebia and Constantius, rejoicing at this opportunity to visit his true homeland. He justified the connection on an ethnic basis. We inhabitants of Thrace and Ionia are grandsons of Greece. but still more because of the educational opportunity. He compared the educational tradition of Greece, especially in philosophy, to the Nile as Egypt's miraculous source of physical fertility. Again, he pulled back from digressing, but now with vindication. I do not see his inapposite remarks when I wish to show how great good she was responsible for doing me, because she honored the name of philosophy. Constantius later recalled Julian from Greece and proposed to make him Caesar. Julian recapitulated the previous episode, adding that Eusebia now rejoiced signally and chimed in, urging him to take confidence and accept the non-negotiable request with good grace. The royal spouse's impetus trades places. Where Eusebia leads, exculpating Julian earlier, now Julian implied she takes up the idea of promoting him from Constantius and intercedes merely to support it. Constantius sends Julian to speak with Eusebia. He beholds her, he recalled, like a statue of continence hallowed in a shrine. She speaks very few words. Julian identifies her reticence as part of the principle of modesty that she embodies. He says, of course, she could do better than any reader, but she refuses to. Instead, her inspirational presence changes his heart. He goes away inspired. His modesty hardened, and his life changed. Another praeteritio telescopes the practical measures Julian again credited to Eusebia, appointments for his friends, his own marriage. But Julian dilated on one gift. Eusebia made Gaul and the land of the Celts a Greek Museon by virtue of books. Julian explained he takes some of them everywhere with him and reads whenever he has leisure, so there is no way I ever forget the giver. Accounts of historical campaigns give him the insight of their leaders when he leads military expeditions now. More generally, too, Julian avowed, study and emulation of the texts of excellent men shape character, so that he educates himself by books, even on campaign. Julian urged, self-consciously again, that his praise of books and literature was not in opposite to his thanks. Both the concreteness with which he described his use of Eusebia's gift and the literary inheritance he wove through the whole panegyric confirmed his assertion. These two sections of the concrete part of the deeds, Eusebia helping to send him to Greece and enabling him to take the study of him into Caesarship, are as literature, as literary benefactions, part of an autonomous generosity above and beyond the specific actions in the political sphere in which he is Constantius's echo chamber. And as these literary patronage, they help to generate the matter of Julian's speech. As ethical gifts, they demonstrate Eusebia's ability to recognize just what Julian needs in order to be his best self, and she acts so as to make it possible for him to do so. In the complementary way, his thanks pervade the speech on both the literary and the ethical levels, suggest that his thanks are indeed deep and sincere. Two more self-referential digressive passages remain to be taken into account. Julian concluded his encomium, refusing to describe a second procession, now Eusebius adventus to Rome, when the emperor was on campaign and crossed the Rhine by bridges and boats near the boundaries of Gaul. Julian offered the reality, this praeteritio implied, in substantiation of the claim in his Teleiotates Incresis, that he could have said even more about Eusebia's benevolent actions. He had compared her again to Penelope by preferences to historical female leaders, and to Pericles for benefit to his citizens. Now Julian's dissolve into the sensory, return to the structural marker he placed by the first repudiated empresses. This withholding of description reasserts the mastery Julian claimed over his literary form. He cast himself as the truly artistic performer of the context he hypothesized earlier. He made a great show of rejecting decoration in service of a better goal. In the brief reference he does allow, Julian evokes Constantius's campaign in Germany, while Eusebia visited Rome. The partnership of empire is sketched, as Eusebia touches the home of empire. But as Julian repeated, he valued Eusebia's rightness for her role, her self-control and judgment, all the more than these externals. This praeterea reinforces the summation of his speech. At the depth of his dubitation about being made Caesar, however, Julian says he figured the challenge intimidating him is that of mastering a restive team of chariot horses who are used to a more experienced driver. This image loosely but inescapably recalls the chariot of the soul in Plato's Phaedrus. In a speech of thanks that highlights the greatest benefaction, giving the beneficiary means and opportunity to realize his intellectual and cultural potential, what could be more momentous? Julian crystallizes this description with a line slightly modified from Nestor's warning to Antilochus before the chariot race at Patroclus' funeral games. So he doesn't injure himself and crash the chariot too. Nestor warned of injuring horses in chariot, but Julian bends the focus to the personal agency of the driver by these consequences. His Homer again makes for him an important emotive commentary. The chariot race was one of the Homeric passages Julian later, in wholly separate work, recalled his tutor Mardonius directing him to prefer to the transitory pleasures of popular culture. It exemplified for Julian the pleasures of Hellenic literary heritage that he encompassed in the speech of thanks to Eusebia. The classical literary and late Roman social decorums that alike idealized the actuation of a woman's will through her husband's authority would have made it improper, and therefore demeaning, not praise, for Julian to have credited Eusebia more focally in his elevation. She remains in the speech perfectly poised, as Julian asserted Constantius initially judged her, the perfect partner, chastely catalyzing the best part of his own will. Julian's recourse to the Odyssey enabled him to portray an emotional depth of this partnership between Eusebia and Constantius, without in any way encroaching on the intimacy of their actual marriage. But in the recognition of his own needs and cultural values, Julian thanked Eusebia for, in the two climactic examples of her specific deeds, sending him to Greece, and after clearing him from unjust suspicions, and giving him books to take to Gaul and be a Caesar, after inspiring him with confidence to embrace the role, Julian showed Eusebia as benefiting him in an analogous, entirely laudable way. He portrayed her as a transcendent patron in the very realm through which he returned his gratitude to her. Literary culture appears consistently in Julian's writings as a love he felt his life long. In thanking Eusebia for helping him to partake of it, Julian made the dearest return he knew. Thank you.
We have time for questions.
Is anything known independently of this speech? I'm sorry, I meant to ask you this earlier, about Eusebia's own educational attainments?
No, I don't think so. Her father was a consul, but not a consular family. there isn't too much more about him than just that bald fact, and not even an identification of who her mother was. I don't think there is anything in particular to say that she necessarily did, or for that matter, necessarily didn't have a good elite education, but it's Julian who actually talks about anything that might imply it. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Moving a little bit away from the empress herself, what he's trying to do with her, Julian's kind of a new kid in town, so to speak. So part of it has to be that he's displaying himself to the family of the well. So in what ways is this speech doing that? How successful do you think he was in this sort of thing?
Oh gosh, well, his the whole delivery question is a curious one because of the fact that it's, although it's clearly following the format of an address in praise of somebody who is normally there, or at least if the speech was sent to court for somebody else to read out, at least present, but he does the whole thing in the third person, and so it's hard to be completely certain what we should envisage for circumstances of performance, but at least he found it useful for whatever his purposes were to suggest that idea of the court audience in normal circumstances. Within those confines, the persona of the philosophical speaker is certainly one that he adopts in the other orations and that other speakers adopt. Themistocles and Synesius, for example. So it's something that not only Julian in the Muse, but also Ammianus in talking about Julian's accession, Gregory in attacking it, the sort of strangeness of the little nerd nobody thought about suddenly being pulled out and set on the imperial stage, especially after his half-brother, the only other male relative available, had made such a spectacular mess of it, as Gallus did. They can't have been expecting very much, and yet as Ammianus reflects, Julian went to Gaul and, at first working in concert with Constantius, was able, not only just not to get himself killed and not to get completely taken over by the subordinates Constantius had clearly assigned to manage him on campaign, but actually started to develop some authenticity as a military and governmental leader in his own right. So at what point on that trajectory the speech is to be dated is a little vague, but apparently not immediately after the promotion. He seems to have been in place for a little while, beginning to make his own. I think as a practitioner of the rhetorical form, he calls on a lot of things that are not just a mechanical application of topoi, but work deftly within some of the logic that the traditional structure implies is useful for grounding a person's character in their background, and then showing by specific actions how they manifest personal quality. And he seems to me to do that ably in calling on the Homeric texts that he does. He weaves them together very closely. Certainly he justifies his educational credentials. So that in many ways the argument for how bringing the books with him on campaign and learning from them is probably what he's at least consciously taking as the claim that most closely answers your question. He shows himself apparently with a military record ultimately to back it up, to learn successfully from his books, even though he personally had been quite alien to this world. So I think it's a pretty good job, really. But it's clearly a very complicated challenge that he's coping with.
So the incorporation of
Thank you.
the incorporation of Eusebia's mother is so unique, and not just the incorporation in general, but the degree to which she sort of described and what she was
Yeah.
I'm wondering, in the sort of lineage portion of speeches, how often is the mother incorporated? Because female it seems so necessary and useful. Is there ever a need for
It's a very good question, and I can't. Let's see. When Claudian praises the two young boys, Olybrius and Frobinus, who were made consuls really out of honor for their deceased father, he gets quite a lot out of their mother, Proba. But again, it's in a very bosom of the family kind of a picture, because they're so young. You know, he makes a point of saying they haven't had any public life hitherto. It would ordinarily form the basis of praise. So that may be a special case too. And you know, though certainly, and on the maternal side is as fair game as agnet kinship. Mothers specifically, others aren't occurring to me, so that may be something that, you know, when there is occasion to go into the family, that's the route to go. Again, when Claudian is making poems about Honorius's wedding, he has a really nice image of Serena as the full-blown rose, as opposed to her daughter who's just a bud at this point. But again, in poetry, in epithalamial poetry, you can do more intimate things than you might in a public and more political speech. Thank you. Sorry.
I feel like poetry makes everybody's mom fair game.
Yeah. Well, yes. She is, of course.
When they're divine, it's easy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, very different ball game. But yes, absolutely. That's not, for example, I think anywhere in Julian's speech for Constantius when he's casting himself as the Achilles, but he's not going to be so brash as Achilles was. He gets off of that one quickly, although it is conceivable Homeric virtue is part of Constantius's portfolio, according to that one. But it is the sort of provoking start to it that he takes.
When I read the speech, I imagine Constantius being not very good at this. And it seems to be, I mean, kind of praising her seems to be at his expense, and especially not very angry against him and everything. And all this sort of subtle allusion to the stuff in the childhood. Also, there's a couple of places where it's that kind of that mask of Christianity seems to be slipping a little bit. It talks about like some daimon saved me, or I think he says Vices.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, just like the occasion for which this was read, whether it's just
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people have wondered about. I think, if you roll it back to the High Empire, and you get discussion of how sort of a speaker by speaking covertly in what he puts forward, all he needs is plausible deniability, and you can put forward things that are really quite negative. And it seems to me Julian is certainly within those confines. He says nothing that could be objectionable. We talked more in the seminar about what the decorums for praising a woman would have to be. And in the orations that Ken Holland studied, the Theodosian empresses, and in other comparably later work, you can see with Theodosius particularly made the women of the family more prominent, partly because he was establishing new dynasties, and the family connections become more prominent, whereas the Constantinian dynasty had other claims to dynastic prowess. But the ideology for women is not to penetrate the personal sphere in any intrusive way, but to portray the woman as a partner who operates within a private sphere through her husband, and yet in doing so is able to inspire him to realize the best of his nature. And given that fact, and this is a speech for Eusebia, I think everything that Julian says can be read in the terms of that kind of relationship. And it's very marked when he changes agency between those two concrete examples of things Eusebia really did, the acquittal and the promotion, that the initiative is Eusebia's in the first case, when it's a matter of dispelling harmfulness from somebody. And in the general passage, he says, you know, she does this for everyone. Nobody can say anybody ever suffered anything because of Eusebia. Total contrast with Hera, really wanted to get Troy. But in the passage where there really is an instance of somebody with unexplained suspicion directed at him, Eusebia takes the initiative in seeing to it that that is dispelled, and Julian can talk with Constantius, and when he clears himself, she is pleased, and then she does this other stuff for him. But when it's a matter of promoting him, that comes from Constantius. He recalls Julian to court. He comes up with it. But when Julian is sort of frozen with the immensity of it all, go talk to Eusebia. And she doesn't really talk to him. She just sort of emanates serenity and is this one oracular assurance. And then Julian is fine. And again, she does some practical stuff and the literary benefit. So I think he certainly acknowledges sort of in the breach that, whereas he said at the head of both of these panels, the emperor has always been very good to me. And then he can't quite deny that there was this period, something really weird going on, but Eusebia dispels that. I don't think he says anything that engages with a criticism of Constantius, but rather he sort of peels that back from what Constantius is all about, so that there is something with which he credits Eusebia, and it is this entirely beneficent thing. And then, of course, in the way that particularly in talking about the gift of books, if the ideal woman is not so much who acts independently in public on her own agency, but through recognizing something in the male with whom she is giving that will help to make him realize what is best in him, that's really what he says Eusebia does in giving him books that enable him to learn from past generals and be a better general himself. And so because of that, I think he can't be pointing any criticism through saying, well, Constantius was mean to me, but Eusebia took care of it. Rather, he replays that same model on himself. So I think it really is this extreme decorum involving the private space of a woman, and especially, of course, his emperor's wife, that he is very careful not to penetrate, and still within those terms shows her as actuating this beneficence.
Do you feel like male recipients of encomium receive as direct comparisons to gods as Eusebia to a kingdom?
Let's see, when Zarius is talking about Constantine's campaigns, he gets an army of angels, so pretty close. It's not quite in the same modality, and I think Claudian talks about Stilicho in very heroic terms that come close to it. But again, poetry has licenses that prose doesn't. It's probably a little bit more direct in this speech because of the way Julian is using classical literature to sort of displace. He doesn't talk about Constantius's and Eusebia's marriage. He talks about Odysseus's and Penelope's because that gives him access to this emotional connection in a way that's accessible to everybody without penetrating their privacy. And I think some of that same decorum is probably operating in the divine comparisons as well, that it's a process, a product of the use of this literary discourse as a language of praise rather than sort of getting into direct theological connections. I think to go back to that question about the religion as such, if you exclude bishops from talking about religion, because they are definitely polemical and they see anything pagan as potentially trouble. But if you look at popular culture more generally, you can see all kinds of things inherited from classical and pagan traditions cohabiting in apparently perfect comfort with Christian images. So that I think in a broader context that is specifically not that of a polemical Christian, those two things were much more comfortable for people to read as, oh, that's a nice metaphor, or, that's a traditional example. Of course, he's using that as an analogy and just elide the religious question entirely. I don't think that was a source of discomfort for anybody.
If within the literary sphere, do you feel like it's the femininity or the royalty that gives her access to the
Yeah, let's see. The Muses are kind of helpmeet figures too. And so that inclines me to say that it's the gender. What she has access to because of the royalty or the appointments, the arrangements, her travel agent activities on Julian's behalf seem to be much more the executive side of her role, but the personal is where he goes into the literary, I think.
Thank you for your talk. So I'm just curious about discuss Julian's genuine
Hey, now.
I wonder if, obviously we know that later on he is going to and that there In this text, or even in the oration, there's actually two constantias later. Do you see that he is acting just genuinely toward him, or do you see that there's more of a I have to follow the guidelines of these relations that are
I haven't worked as closely with those speeches. In the conference that I was telling you about, organized at Loyola, Hal Drake spoke about the second oration for Constantius, and he started out his talk with, in essence, a remapping of what Julian does, at least on one reading, in these, as I say, manic Homeric digressions. Hal started talking, ostensibly about the speech, and then he started digressing and casting people in these roles, and gradually, as people in the audience caught the recognition of what he was doing, people started cracking up. And his suggestion ultimately is that although there's probably nothing in the speech that would have excluded an actual performance in court, though probably in that case a question of mailing the thing in for somebody else, some other poor individual to read out. There's nothing that a speaker could not have gotten away with under the decorums of court. That it was probably more likely that that one Julian composed as a kind of fictive piece, and in some of the things that through the Homeric examples of that speech he's constructing is a program for what a really good emperor would do as a ruler, and so that the likelier audience was probably his own circle and a sort of fictive thing, what he could have done. The early oration for Constantius, I think, is probably as sincere as most public panegyrics were. We're in this official position. This is the basis on which we're going forward now. These are the good things I can say about you. This is how I want the relationship to go forward into the future. We'll fill up, half an hour this way, and everybody goes away happy, right? And that one is more sort of straightforward proceeding in the rhetorical mode. But I really think that with Eusebia, he goes into some stuff that Julian is one of the writers from whom we have such a body of literature, and his concern for literature as such, as something that really brought him joy, crops up all over it. So that connecting Eusebia particularly to that, I think, is not just a formal way of recognizing her role, but of genuinely showing an appreciation of the circumstances seem to imply. Not that it couldn't have pulled it off if he actually hated her and just wanted to give formal acknowledgement to it and make it sound good. But as I say, these things come up particularly in the Eusebia when he remembers this moment of having his beard shaved off and his soldier's cloak thrown around, and the soldiers are looking at, right. And in narrating those passages of his early Caesarhood, when Ammianus Marcellinus narrates it, he says that the soldiers referred to him as a talking mole. He was short, and apparently his beard grew really rapidly. He was one of these, 2 shaves a day guys. And, he clearly was a kind of incongruous figure. But even when we're calling that in something that he wrote when he was in open rebellion against Constantius, he says that Eusebia was kindly to him. And that, again, I think helps to confirm that there was something that he really appreciated about her treatment of him in here.
So thank you. I I think we can all go away happy.
Thank you so much.